Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be looking at a game between two players, Baze versus Palmer. And the game was played in 2004. It was featured on chessgames.com as the game of the day not too long ago. And both players are around a 2,000 rating, so they're definitely not GMs. But keep in mind that even if you're watching a GM game, they're playing at a much higher level than these guys. But even these guys rated 2,000, you can still learn quite a bit from their games. And just because you're rated 2,000 doesn't mean you won't have an epic game. So this is definitely an epic game in my opinion, and a lot of people agreed, which is why it was a game of the day on chessgames.com. So we're going to go ahead and get into it, and it starts with pawn to e4, pawn e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3. Looks like we're getting into the knights game here, and then knight to f6 development. So we currently here on the 4 knights game. Now if it was me in this situation, I would have played the Halloween gambit. Knight takes on e5. I am a super aggressive player. This is an actual tournament, so a lot of times you won't see players, especially ranked 2,000 or above, try anything like the Halloween gambit. But a lot of times they are well versed in the opening that they're playing, and white brought his bishop to b5. Now I do want to talk about the next move. Black brought his bishop to d6. I would have really liked him to bring his bishop down to b4, kind of counterattacking at the same time this knight on c3. I feel like the bishop on d6, it kind of hinders his development. You're only playing a little passive defense, trying to hold on to this e5 pawn. Keep in mind that if white takes on c6 here, this knight here on c6 is the lone defender currently of this pawn here on e5. So yes, he is defending it with his bishop on d6, but he's really hindering the development of his light squared bishop on c8. Since he can't move his pawn on d7, it's really going to take a little time for him to get his light squared bishop into the game, which he'd really like to do anytime you do play chess. You really want to get your minor pieces into the game, and then start to get your major pieces into the game. Now from here, white played pawn to d3. He could have easily castled kingside. Obviously, castling kingside is going to happen eventually. But since he got his light squared bishop out, usually you want to get your bishops out before you close them in, and pawn to d3 is going to not allow him to develop his light squared bishop. So he developed his light squared bishop first, and now he played d3 so that he can get his dark squared bishop into the game whenever he wants to. Obviously, he can castle, but this pawn on d3, there's no really threats right now, so he's just building up the center control, opening up lines for his dark square bishop, and also allowing him to castle on the king side. Now black right away really does not like this knight here on c6 being pinned down by this bishop, so he's going to start to bring his pawns into the action and try to kick this bishop out of the way. Now the bishop now is going to come back to c4, and you'll see this a lot of times when white brings his light squared bishop to b5. You have two options: bringing it back to a4 here, or bringing it to c4, putting a lot of pressure on this f7 square. Obviously in chess early on, the f7 square is a very big weakness for black, especially if he hasn't castled on the king side or even on the queen side yet. But since this black king hasn't moved yet, this c4 square is a very good square for the light squared bishop. He is attacking it. Anytime we can bring our knight here to g5, set up a little double attack here, but this is going to put a lot of pressure on this f7 square, especially if we ever want to bring it back to b3. We can even make room if we advance our a pawn, then we can stick our bishop back on a2. So this bishop here on c4 is putting a lot of pressure. Now once we do move our bishop back to c4, now black has the option to bring his bishop to c5 as well, because again he was only on this d6 square to defend this e5 pawn, and it was only being defended by this c6 knight. Since the c6 knight is no longer being attacked, we can now bring our bishop to c5. Now it's white's move, and this is a very important situation in the game. We've kind of come to the point where the beginning of the game turns into the middle game, which is very important in chess. And as you kind of look at it, both sides have about the same setup here. Now kingside castle for white here. Black is not castled yet. He does have a pawn here on a6, but as far as the middle of the structure, the minor pieces, they are all completely the same. So white really has to figure out how he wants to continue. Now keep in mind, if you're white, you usually want to stay ahead in tempo, and so in this case you really want to play a move that's going to keep you ahead as far as development. So keep in mind when we talk about our bishop here on c4 attacking this pawn on f7 and the square in general, at the same time black, his bishop here on c5 is also attacking our pawn on f2, which is a huge weakness for us. Even though we are castled on the king side, it's still a huge weakness here for white. So what I would do, and I would recommend, is to play bishop to e3. Now why would I do this? Because if he takes, we're going to have doubled pawns here on the e file. Well, I would do it for two reasons. One, I don't think there's another great move, and so what I normally do is I look at what are black's strengths right here, and I see that this dark square bishop here on c5 is a huge strength. It's developed nicely, and at the same time it's attacking a huge weakness for us. Now if he takes here on e3 and we recapture, doubled pawns in the middle are not nearly as bad as doubled pawns on the A or B files. So yes, we do have doubled pawns, but they are on the E file, which is not as bad, and we are defending the square on d4 and the square on f4. At the same time, if you look at this situation, we're really starting to put a lot of pressure on this f file, specifically this f7 pawn. Now again, I am a very aggressive player, so keep that in the back of your head, but our rook here on f1 is now on a semi-open file, and we can start to attack this f7 square for black. So if we do ever move our knight out of the way, depending on where we want to move it, we really are opening up a lot of doors to start to attack on the king side for black. So going back, white did not choose this. Instead he chose pawn to h3. Now this is really just a waiting move, doesn't really want to commit to anything, really doesn't want black to develop his light square bishop here to g4, pinning down his knight to the queen. Now if he was afraid of that, he could have always brought his bishop to g5, pinning the knight down to the queen, but he opted for the safer route, the h3 move, kind of waiting to see what black's going to do. Now from here, black has to start thinking about the same thing. He's approaching the middle game and he has to figure out how to attack white. So in this case, he sees that this bishop here on c4, as we talked about, is a huge strength for white. It's attacking this pawn here on f7, and so he really wants to try to get this bishop out of the game. So he played, which I think is the correct move, his knight to a5, attacking this bishop at the same time. There's really no place for this light square bishop to go. Anywhere he moves it, black has the option to take it. So from here, white just go ahead and disregards this bishop. He's going to recapture with his pawn here from d3, and instead he starts to go on the attack. He brings his bishop to g5, and black comes in and he takes with his knight on c4, which I think is the correct move. It's taking away a huge threat. His knight on c6 wasn't doing too much, and so he exchanged it for what I feel is the strongest minor piece that white had in the game, this bishop here on c4. So even a small move like that, bringing his knight to a5, you really have to figure out what your strengths are, as well as what your opponent's strengths are, and then start to attack those and find the weaknesses in your opponent's game. So from here, as you can imagine, white captured on c4, and then black brought his pawn to h6, really trying to get rid of this pin that we have here on this knight on f6. White here, not wanting to give up his last bishop, brought his bishop back to h4, and now one of the decisive moves in the game. Black has made up his mind. As you can tell, he is not castled on the king side, and I don't know exactly what Palmer was thinking, but I probably think if in the back of his head the entire game, since he hadn't castled already on the king side, that he was really looking to play aggressive on the king side and castle on the queen side. And we can tell from his next move, pawn to g5, that that's exactly what he intends to do. You're not going to play pawn to g5 and then castle on the king side. That just doesn't make sense, because your king side is completely obliterated as far as safety is concerned. So he's really looking to get his queen out of the way and get his bishop out of the way, and then castle on the queen side and really start to attack on this king side for white. Anytime both sides castle on different sides, it's really going to be just complete chaos. Now here's where the chess game really took a turn for the worst as far as white's concerned. White is completely fine in the situation. If he brings his bishop back to g3, he has a fine game. Again, the game is equal right now in my opinion, and this is completely fine for white. And black's starting to overextend himself a little bit on the king side, and white has a lot of different options to start to counterattack on the queen side. But instead of bringing his bishop back to g3, which is a completely safe square, he went ahead and captured on g5. And obviously when black recaptured, black captured with his bishop on g5. Now, this really says that black's really trying to attack, and he's trying to attack by a sacrifice. Now, he did give up one of his minor pieces for 2 pawns from black, but you really got to figure out why he did this. Now, black is not committed to each side. He hasn't committed to the king side. More than likely, he's going to commit to the queen side. You really only want to do a sacrifice like this on, the pawns if the king has committed to one of these sides. Once this black king castles on the queen side, the advantage for white as far as his attack is not going to be there anymore. So I find this move pretty hard to justify for white, trading material and losing a piece in material just for the sake of doing it, because his attack's really not going anywhere and the king's really not in danger right now. White really doesn't have any options to continue his attack here. Now from here it's black's move, and he brought his rook to g8, setting up this if he takes with his bishop here on h3. So white, seeing this, brought his pawn to h4. Now if you look at this situation, take a minute and think what you would do for black in this case. And what black did is he actually played pawn to c6. I'm not sure I completely agree with this. Keep in mind that we've really started to put a lot of pressure on this king side. This h pawn has come up to h4, so this is really weakening this h file, which we can easily put pressure on. And at the same time, really all we have to do is castle on the queen side for black, and then we can start to really put a ton of pressure on the white king side right here. So I would really recommend bringing our bishop down to g4. It really gains a tempo. At the same time, it makes way for us to castle on the queen side. Gaining a tempo meaning that we're attacking this queen on d1, so he's going to have to move his queen in response to this move. At the same time, now we can develop our queen and then castle on the queen side. He can't develop one of his minor pieces right now or start to defend his king anymore because he has to move his queen here, or he's going to have to move knight to e2. He's going to have to respond to our bishop here on g4. But instead of playing bishop to g4, he first played pawn to c6, and white played king to h1. Kind of just a waiting move. At the same time, he really wants to get his king out of the way of this rook here on g8, eyeing down. At the same time, this bishop here on c5 is eyeing down these dark squares. Again, remember, this dark square bishop on c5 has been a pain the entire game, eyeing down this pawn here on the f2 square, which is still a huge weakness for white. Now black decided to bring his queen to e7. Not a whole lot of options where he's going to bring his queen. He has 3 moves right here. Again, eventually he's going to bring his bishop into the action so he can castle on the queen side, get all his pieces involved. Again, it's not how many pieces you have in chess, it's how many pieces you have available to attack your opponent. So even if you are down in material, if you have more pieces involved in the attack, a lot of times that's going to be a better game for you. So just keep that in mind. Black really wants to get all his pieces involved, even though he is up in material. So white from here, he starts to try to get aggressive, and he plays pawn to f4. And this is partly one of the reasons that he played king to h1. He really wants to try to counterattack. Now he is counterattacking at the same time weakening his king side, so I'm not really sure if that's the best move. But he does realize that he is down in material, and at the same time his king is starting to get a lot of pressure on him. So he wants to try to do everything he can to try to counterattack. He knows it's not going to be a drawish game, and so he's going to do everything he can to try to win the game. That's black move, and he chose to now bring his bishop to g4, which is a move I really like. It really develops a piece and at the same time allows him to castle on the queen side whenever he wants to. White from here brought his queen to e1. Again, he was being attacked, so he had to do something about this queen. And now black started to take pieces. He took this pawn on f4, and now white took with his rook on f4. Now, if you want to pause this game, this was a decisive move in the game. There are a few other moves that could have definitely been played, but this really brings us to a fundamental idea in chess. So if you want to pause and just think what you would have done, and then I'll kind of go over what was played in the game. And what's played in the game was rook takes on g5. And as you can see from the game, he traded a rook for a bishop and a pawn. After the pawn takes, he now brought his queen down to e5, attacking this rook and at the same time attacking this pawn here on g5. So he's going to take one of them, most notably this rook is going to move, or this queen is going to come into the action, defend this rook, and he's going to take this pawn on g5. So he does move down as far as material advantage by 1 point, but what this really does is it really takes this key defender away from g5, and black really understands what we talked about is it's not how much material you have, it's how much material you have in the game. And he realized that white had this huge piece right here, this bishop really holding down a lot of the fort here as far as the protection, and he knew if he took this and then took this pawn, then this h file would be open, and at the same time once he castled he could really start to put tons of pressure on this white kingside right here on this h1. And at the same time, this rook here on a1, although it is kind of the equalizer as far as material points, it's not doing too much, and it's going to be really hard for him to get into the action. He's not going to be able to defend anything, and it's going to take him a few moves before he can even attack black. So black saw this, and he said, you know what, I'm going to lose material and sacrifice my rook so that I can completely dominate with all the pieces that I do have on the board. So from here, white chose to bring his queen to g3. He really wants to keep his rook here on f4, and he's just going to give up his pawn here on g5. Now, with his queen here on g3, black does have two options. He could have brought his knight here to h5, attacking both this rook and the queen. He chose just to go ahead and take this pawn on g5. I'm sure this was kind of in his head as far as he wanted to take this bishop and this pawn here on g5. From here, white moved rook to f1. Again, white really has to get his other rook involved, or else he's going to be down way too much material as far as attacking. So he's just trying to do everything he can to counterattack. And now black castled to the queen side, which is kind of what we've been waiting for most of the game. And now he can really get his other rook into the game, and once he brings his rook to h8, it's really going to be hard for white to stop all the attacks that black has. And again, at the same time, black still has this bishop here on c5, which I'm sure white's just been infuriated about. And again, he really should have brought his bishop to e3 a long time ago and traded that off, because this bishop on c5, even though we have all our major pieces getting into the action, this is really a decisive move and piece for black, just having his bishop hanging out here on c5, attacking this diagonal and really minimizing where this white king can move to. From here is kind of a formality. White decided to move his queen back to h2 so that black couldn't right away play h8, where obviously the queen could take the rook on h8. But from here, black decided to keep up the pressure, and he moved his knight to h5. Again, his knight was being attacked here, so he decided just to attack this rook here on f4. From here, white played pawn to g3, trying to defend this rook on f4, even though it's going to be taken. So black takes, and after he retakes, the queen is now brought to g7, which is a great square. It's still putting a lot of pressure on this open g file now. At the same time, if we were to move this bishop, we can now move this bishop wherever we want. This dark square bishop is putting a lot of pressure on this long diagonal here, and we're still going to hold down this g file. At the same time, we can always bring our rook to the h file, and now we have a defender against it. So if we bring our rook to h8, we're not only attacking the queen and the king, but at the same time it's defended, so white can't just come in and take it on h8. From here, white saw that he could bring the rook to h8, and so he brought his king to g2 to get rid of that, and black played bishop to e2, attacking this rook on f1, and at the same time a discovered attack with this queen here from g7. So the game was pretty much lost, and white went ahead and resigned from here. So this was a brilliant game, I thought. So much to learn from the game as far as position, different things to look at as far as your opponent's weaknesses, their strengths, what you should do as far as forming a game plan. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe and also check out the website. thechesswebsite.com, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.